His hand finds the back of her neck before either of them decides this is a good idea. The kitchen is dark except for the light above the stove. Service long finished. Staff gone home hours ago. She has stayed late again, plating something nobody asked her to plate, the way she has found reasons to stay late 3 nights running now. He didn't ask her to stay. He also didn't ask her to leave. Neither of them says anything when he crosses the space between them. The kiss is slow, certain, the kind that happens because 2 people have been circling it for weeks and finally stopped pretending otherwise. His breath catches against her mouth. Not desire, something else. His hand tightens hard on the edge of the counter. And then his whole body goes rigid, and he is on the kitchen floor before she understands what she is watching. She is on her knees beside him, screaming for the guard posted outside the door, one hand still tangled in his hair, the other pressed to a jaw clenched so tight she is afraid he will crack a tooth. Whatever just happened to him, it is not the first time. Somewhere on the counter, knocked loose from his pocket in the fall, sits a small, unmarked pill case she has never seen before. Stay with me. Because what she does in the next 60 seconds will tell you everything about who she really is underneath the uniform and the careful distance she has kept for 4 months. The seizure passes as fast as it came. He comes back to himself with her hand still cupping his jaw, and the first thing he does before thanking her, before explaining anything, is search her face for fear, braced for her to pull away now that she has seen this. She doesn't pull away. His head of security arrives too fast, the kind of fast that only comes from having done this exact cleanup before. He reaches for the pill case like it's routine. He orders her out of the room. Di-sung, still on the floor, says no. She stays. The room goes quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when someone has just told the truth by accident. Alone again, once the security team backs off, he gives her only a fraction of the real story. A health condition, he says. Something he manages privately. Nothing more. She doesn't push. But she doesn't move her hand off him either, and neither of them acknowledges that. He walks her to her car himself that night, close enough that their hands brush twice on the way, and neither of them pulls back. At her door, neither of them moves to end it cleanly. The kiss from the kitchen is still sitting in the air between them, unfinished business neither is ready to name. She drives home telling herself this was one strange, frightening, unrepeatable night. She has told herself that before. It has never once been true. 4 months earlier, she took a job cooking in the private residence of a man she had only known from headlines, Di-sung, heir to a name that meant something in rooms she would never be invited into. She told herself the job was purely professional. She has spent 4 months slowly failing to keep it that way. She notices the exact way he takes his coffee, black, no sugar, but only after 9 in the morning, never before. She learns his moods through what he eats and doesn't eat. The untouched plate on the nights something in the company has gone wrong. The second helping on the rare nights something has gone right. She stays 20 minutes later than she needs to on the nights she knows he will be home alone, telling herself it's about the dishes. It was never about the dishes. The morning after the kiss, he finds an excuse to come down to the kitchen before anyone else is awake. He doesn't need coffee. He has a coffee machine 3 rooms closer to his own. He comes anyway. Neither of them mentions the kiss. The conversation is made entirely of things they don't say, the long pause before he asks how she slept, the way she keeps her back to him a beat too long at the stove, the way he doesn't leave when the coffee is done. "You could have let him take me out of the room," she says finally, not looking at him. "I could have," he says. "I didn't want to." That's all either of them offers. It's enough to change the air in the room completely. Don't look away yet, because what happens over the next few weeks is not two people being careful. It's two people finding new reasons to be close and telling themselves every single one of those reasons is professional. He starts finding reasons to be in the kitchen during off hours. She starts cooking specifically for the version of him no one else in the house ever sees. The version who eats standing at the counter instead of at the long table set for one. The version who laughs at something on his phone before catching himself and putting it away. The second kiss doesn't happen by accident. It happens because he reaches for her hand while she's plating, and instead of letting go, she turns her palm into his. He kisses her slowly this time, deliberately, both of them choosing it instead of falling into it. Neither of them says what it means. They don't have to. 2 weeks after the first collapse, it happens again, smaller this time, his hand at her waist instead of her neck when the tremor starts. This time she doesn't call for the guard first. She holds him through it herself, right there against the counter, and something about being trusted with that, about him letting her be the one who catches him instead of his own security team, changes the shape of whatever is growing between them. When it passes, he doesn't apologize. He doesn't explain either. He just says, quietly, with his forehead against hers, "It's getting worse." That single sentence lands harder than any declaration would have. He tells her the rest that night, sitting on the floor of his own kitchen, because neither of them has moved to somewhere more comfortable. It isn't just a health condition. It's a condition specific people in his world would use against him the moment they learned how serious it has become, a weakness, in the language his family's enemies speak fluently. And now that she knows, she isn't just his chef anymore. She's someone his enemies would consider a target too. She should be afraid. She notices, distantly, that she isn't. The first person to notice something has shifted in that house is not the security chief. It's his cousin. His name is Yi-won, and he has never once liked how close the chef stands to Di-sung at family dinners. He is the kind of relative who says nothing directly and remembers everything precisely. The way she refills Di-sung's water before he asks. The way Di-sung's shoulders drop half an inch the second she walks into a room. For weeks, Yi-won has been watching in the patient, unhurried way people watch when they already suspect the answer and are simply waiting for proof. He starts finding small reasons to be in the house during hours he never used to visit. He asks the household staff careless-sounding questions that aren't careless at all. Has she always stayed this late? Does Di-sung usually eat in the kitchen instead of the dining room? He is building something, quietly, the way men in that family are trained to build things patiently, and without warning anyone before it's finished. It surfaces first at a family dinner, the kind she is usually invisible at, standing near the sideboard refilling glasses no one thanks her for refilling. Yi-won raises his glass to Di-sung mid-meal, voice light, eyes not light at all. "You're eating well lately," he says. "Better than you have in years from what I hear." The table laughs, assuming it's nothing. Di-sung doesn't laugh. He holds Yi-won's gaze for exactly 1 second too long, long enough that she feels it from across the room even with her back half turned, and Yi-won simply smiles and lets the moment pass, the way a man lets a moment pass when he already has more of them than he needs. He tests it again a week later, cornering Di-sung alone on the terrace, no witnesses, nothing that could be repeated back as an accusation. "I'm not going to pretend I haven't noticed," he says. "The only question is whether you're going to tell me yourself, or whether I find out the way I usually find things out in this family, by accident at the worst possible time." Di-sung tells him nothing, Not out of distrust exactly. Out of the specific fear of a man who has learned that the safest secret is the one fewer people carry. Yi-won doesn't push further that night. He simply says, "Fine. Then I'll wait," in the tone of a man who has never once had to wait very long for anything he wanted to know. Neither Di-sung nor she notices they are being watched as closely as they are until the night it almost costs them everything. It's late, past 11, the house supposedly empty. Di-sung's hand is at her waist, her back against the counter, his forehead resting against hers in the kind of stillness that only exists when two people believe, completely, that no one else is awake. Neither of them hears the door. Yi-won is standing in the doorway for a full 3 seconds before either of them notices him. 3 seconds is long enough. His eyes move from her hand fisted in Di-sung's shirt to the space between their mouths to Di-sung's face, and something in his expression settles, like a man closing a file he has been building for months. Nobody speaks. Di-sung doesn't step back from her, which tells Yi-won more than any explanation could have. She doesn't drop her hand either, and that tells him even more. "I'll knock next time," Yi-won says finally, in a voice that isn't quite a threat and isn't quite kindness. Then he's gone, and the silence he leaves behind is worse than anything he could have said. Don't look away, because the closer these two get, the more dangerous it becomes for either of them to be caught being exactly this close. And now someone in that house has already seen it. Di-sung wants to go after him immediately. She's the one who stops him, her hand flat against his chest, because chasing Yi-won down a hallway at midnight would only confirm exactly what he already knows. It's 2 days before Yi-won says anything else, and when he finally does, it isn't to Di-sung. He corners her in the pantry on a Tuesday afternoon, arms crossed, blocking the doorway just enough that she understands the conversation isn't optional. "You know what he is," Yi-won says, not a question. "I know what he is to me," she says. "That's not what I asked." He studies her the way you study something you're deciding whether to trust or report. Half the people in this family think he should have married someone chosen for him years ago. The other half are waiting for him to be weak enough that it stops mattering what he wants. You understand which category you fall into, for both of them. She doesn't flinch, and that, more than anything she could have said, is what makes him uncross his arms. "I'm not going to tell my uncle," Yi-won says finally. "Not because I like you. I don't know you well enough to like you. I'm not telling him because I've never once seen my cousin look at anyone the way he looks at you, and I'm tired of watching him be alone in a house full of people who only want something from him." He steps aside from the doorway. "But if this becomes a liability instead of just a secret, I won't protect either of you a second time." It isn't friendship. It's something colder and more useful, a warning wrapped around a promise. She understands, walking out of that pantry, that they have just survived the first real test of how many people might eventually know, and that surviving it once doesn't mean they'll survive it again. She tells Di-sung only part of the conversation that night. She doesn't tell him how close it came to being over before it had a chance to become anything at all. Di-sung finds out anyway, because Yi-won goes to him directly the next morning, and this time there is nothing careless in his tone at all. "I could have gone to your father with this," Yi-won says. "I didn't. I need you to understand that's not nothing coming from me." There's an old weight underneath the words, something neither of them says outright. The years Yi-won spent watching Di-sung inherit rooms he himself was never going to be given, the quiet resentment that never quite curdled into hatred, because some part of him always understood his cousin was as trapped by that family as he was. I'm not protecting her, Yi-won adds. I'm protecting the first true thing I've seen you have in this house. Don't make me regret which one I chose. Di-sung doesn't thank him. Men like them don't. But something shifts between the two cousins that morning that has nothing to do with old resentment and everything to do with a debt neither of them will ever say out loud. It's the head of security, not Di-sung, and not Yi-won, who finally tells her the full weight of what she's actually protecting. He corners her in that same pantry a week later, voice low, and lays it out plainly. The seizures aren't just a private struggle. They are a liability the family has spent years hiding from rivals who would read a single public collapse as an opening. An old associate pushed out of the business years ago, still watching, still waiting for exactly this kind of weakness to surface. He hasn't told you that part, the man says. I think you should hear it from someone. She goes home that night and doesn't sleep. Not because she's frightened of Di-sung, because she understands, fully now, what staying actually costs and how many people are already circling the exact thing she's chosen to protect. Di-sung must sense it, because 2 days later he does something he has never done before. He sits across from her, not beside her, at the small kitchen table instead of standing at the counter, and he gives her a real choice. You can walk away, he says. Take a severance, a good one. No one would blame you, and no one outside this house would ever have to know you were part of any of this. He says it like a man who has already resigned himself to losing something. He says it like he needs her to actually consider it, not just refuse it out of instinct. She doesn't answer right away. She lets the silence sit exactly as long as it needs to because she wants him to know this isn't reflex. This is a decision. I'm not taking the severance, she says finally. Say that again when you've thought about it for a week. I don't need a week. What she says in the next few lines decides everything that happens after this. So stay with me. Because this is the moment the whole story has been building toward, and it is not the moment either of them expected. She tells him she has spent 4 months learning the exact shape of his loneliness through what's left on a plate. She tells him she noticed the pill case on the floor before she noticed anything else that night, and instead of running, she picked it up and put it back in his pocket before the guard ever saw. She tells him Yi-won already knows, and didn't tell anyone, because even he could see it was real. She tells him she isn't staying because she doesn't understand the risk. She's staying because she does, and she's choosing it anyway. He doesn't say anything for a long moment. Then he reaches across the table and laces his fingers through hers, and it feels less like romance and more like a vow neither of them is saying out loud yet. 3 weeks later, it happens exactly the way the security chief feared it would. A gala. Cameras. Half the city's old money in one ballroom, including the one man who has spent a decade waiting for a single piece of proof that Di-sung is not as untouchable as his family pretends. Di-sung is mid-toast when his hand finds the edge of the podium too hard. His voice catches on a word, and this time there is no dark, empty kitchen to hide it in. This time there are 300 witnesses and a dozen phones already lifting to film it. She is across the room before she can think, and she does not care who sees her reach him first. If you've made it this far, you already know what's really being tested here isn't his health. It's whether she'll still be standing beside him once the whole room, and eventually the whole city, knows exactly what he's been hiding. Tell me in the comments the moment you knew she wasn't going anywhere, because this is the part of the story people never forget. By morning, it is not a secret contained inside one house anymore. It is a headline, a rumor, and a weapon finally landed in the one hand that has wanted it for 10 years. The man from the gala, the old associate the security chief warned her about, the one everyone in that family has spent a decade managing rather than confronting, releases a single statement by noon, worded carefully enough to avoid a lawsuit and cruelly enough to do exactly what it's designed to do. Questions about the family's judgment. Questions about succession. Questions about whether a man who collapses in front of 300 witnesses should be trusted with what he's set to inherit. The family's response is fast, and it is cold, and for the first time since she started working in that house, she watches the machinery of it up close. Lawyers arrive before breakfast. A statement goes out under the family name before Di-sung has even seen a draft of it. The patriarch, Di-sung's father, a man she has met exactly twice in 4 months and been unsettled by both times, calls an emergency meeting in the room at the end of the hall that she has never once been allowed inside. She isn't in that room, but she hears what comes out of it, because Yi-won finds her afterward in the kitchen, jaw tight, and tells her plainly. The board wants Di-sung to step back from the succession timeline until the story dies down. His father wants to know exactly how long the chef has known, and exactly what she is to his son, because a photograph from the gala is already circulating, her hand on his arm, her face inches from his, not the face of an employee. They want you gone, Yi-won says. Quietly, today if possible. They think it removes a question the press is already asking. And Di-sung hasn't agreed to it yet. Yi-won's mouth twists into something that isn't quite a smile, which is its own kind of answer. It takes 4 hours for Di-sung to walk out of that room, and when he does, he comes straight to the kitchen, straight to her, in front of staff who now know everything there is to know. His father is 2 steps behind him, and the look on the older man's face is the look of someone who has just lost an argument he expected to win easily. "Tell her yourself," his father says, not unkindly, more like a man testing whether his son will actually do it. Di-sung doesn't let go of her hand. "She stays," he says. "If the board has a problem with that, they can bring it to me directly instead of asking her to disappear so the problem looks solved." "You understand what you're choosing," his father says, and it isn't quite a threat, though it costs her something to hear it delivered so evenly. The board will call this recklessness. The press will call it a scandal. And if the condition becomes public in full, not rumor, not a stumble at a podium, but the truth of it, there will be people in this family who use it as a reason you were never fit to inherit in the first place. You're not only choosing her, you're choosing to make yourself harder to protect. "I know exactly what I'm choosing," Di-sung says. "I chose it the night she stayed on that kitchen floor with me instead of doing what everyone else in this house is trained to do, which is disappear the moment something looks like weakness. I'm not undoing that because a board is uncomfortable." His father studies them both for a long moment, long enough that she braces for the worst kind of answer, and then he says only, "Your mother would have liked her," and leaves without saying anything else. It isn't approval. It isn't quite a blessing either. But it is the first time anyone in that family has looked at her like she might actually belong in that house, instead of like a liability standing too close to something valuable. The old associate doesn't stop there. 2 days after the statement, he tries something quieter and far more dangerous. A call to her directly, an unfamiliar number, a voice pleasant enough that it takes her a moment to understand what's being offered. Money, and a great deal of it, in exchange for details. What the seizures look like. How often. What medication. Enough specifics to make the next public collapse impossible to explain away as exhaustion or stress, the way the family's lawyers keep insisting to reporters that it was. She hangs up without answering a single question, and then she does the one thing that scares her more than the offer itself. She tells Sung everything, word for word, instead of deciding on her own that he doesn't need to know. He goes very still when she finishes, not angry at her, something closer to afraid, in a way she has never seen on him before, not even on the kitchen floor the first night. "They'll try again," he says. "With you specifically, now that they know you won't be moved by threats. Money is just the first thing they try." "It scares me," she says. "It doesn't change anything." He's right to be afraid, and it doesn't take long to prove it. 4 nights later, leaving the house well after midnight, she notices the same dark sedan 2 turns behind her that was parked outside the market that morning, not following closely enough to be obvious, just closely enough that she stops believing it's a coincidence somewhere around the 3rd turn. She doesn't go home. She calls the number Sung gave her for exactly this reason. And within minutes, there are headlights behind the sedan that weren't there before. And then the sedan is gone, turning off before the next light, and she is shaking in a parking lot while a man she's never met introduces himself as part of the detail that's apparently been watching her without her knowing for 2 weeks. Sung is at her door before she's finished telling the story a second time. He doesn't ask if she's hurt, because he can see she isn't. He pulls her in against him and holds on the way she held him the second time he collapsed. And for a long moment, neither of them says anything at all, because there isn't a version of the truth that makes either of them feel safer right now. "I could send you somewhere," he says finally, into her hair. "Somewhere they can't reach. You'd be safe. You'd hate it and you'd be safe." "I didn't stay for safe," she says. "You already know that." He doesn't argue. He just holds her tighter, and something in the way he does it tells her he was hoping she'd say exactly that, even while dreading it. The consequences that follow are not gentle, but they are, finally, protective instead of chaotic. His security team builds a quiet perimeter around her that she never sees directly, but feels in small ways. A driver who is somehow always available now. A new lock on the kitchen's side entrance. Yiwon appearing at odd hours with no explanation beyond a nod that means he's simply making sure. The rival's leverage gets taken apart the way these things are taken apart in that world, methodically, without headlines, by people whose entire job is making problems stop existing quietly. Within 2 weeks, the story has moved on to whatever the news cycle needs next, and the old associate's name stops appearing in the same sentence as Sung's at all. None of that is the part of the story that matters most, though. What matters is that every single day during it, she is still in that kitchen when Sung comes home. Still plating something he didn't ask for. Still there, long after anyone would have blamed her for finally taking the severance and disappearing into a life with far fewer people trying to buy pieces of her. He tells her, one night when the worst of it has finally passed, that he used to think the condition was the most dangerous thing about him. He doesn't think that anymore. The most dangerous thing about him, he says, is how much he needed someone to stay once they knew the truth, and how certain he'd been that no one would. She had proven him wrong from the very first night on the kitchen floor. The story ends the way it began. Same kitchen, same low light from the stove. Same 2 people standing exactly where they stood the night everything started. This time, nothing interrupts them. He crosses the space between them slowly, the way he did the first time, except there is nothing uncertain in it now, no weeks of circling, no unfinished business hanging in the air. His hand finds the back of her neck the way it did that very first night. She doesn't tense, waiting for something to go wrong. Neither does he. The kiss is unhurried, chosen, exactly the way both of them have wanted it to be since the very beginning. And when it ends, he doesn't pull away to check her face for fear this time. He already knows what he'll find there. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with everyone who watched it unfold in real time, tell me which moment broke you the most. The pill case on the floor, the choice at the kitchen table, or the toast that changed everything. And if you want the next story like this one before anyone else sees it, you already know what to do. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who loves unforgettable love stories. And if you're passionate about powerful Afro-Korean romances filled with emotion, culture, and unexpected twists, hit the subscribe button and become part of our family. Click the next video on your screen and let another incredible journey begin. I'll see you there.